years old, the Bayeux tapestry provides an exceptional account of the history of Normandy and England in the 11th century. Though the tapestry is packed with information, its origins remain unclear. Almost certainly made in the years just after the Norman conquest of England, the similarities in its lettering with Saxon manuscripts of the period indicate it was probably embroidered in England. For many years it was known as the Tapestry of Queen Matilda. She was the wife of William the Conqueror and is thought to have initiated it. More recent research has shown that this embroidery on linen may in fact have been commissioned by Odo, William's half-brother, who appears many times in the tapestry. Odo, the Bishop of Bayeux, probably intended it to decorate the new cathedral at Bayeux, or Bagias, one of the few town names inscribed in woolen thread on the linen cloth. Every year, its display at holy festivals of relics helped educate the worshippers as both an epic poem and a moral tale. The tapestry's later history was turbulent, barely known before the 18th century. Carried away in the fervour of the Revolution, it was eventually restored and is exhibited throughout the year in a museum in Bayeux, its town of origin. Despite some damage and a missing final section, this uninterrupted account, almost 70 meters long, relates an extraordinary epic. The date is 1064. Edward the Confessor, King of England and an old man, must ensure his succession. Childless, he summons Harold Godwinson, his brother-in-law, and entrusts him with the mission of announcing to William the Bastard, Duke of Normandy, that he is naming him as heir to the throne of England. At the time, William is at war with Duke Conan of Brittany. Harold takes part in the expedition as his guest and shows himself a brave fighter. William knights him and makes his vassals swear an oath on holy relics to respect Edward's wishes. Shortly after Harold returns to England, Edward dies and is buried in Westminster Abbey. At the same time, Harold breaks his oath and has himself crowned King of England. In Normandy, William decides to go and take possession of his inheritance. Ships are armed and put to sea. The fleet arrives on the south coast of England, and the Norman army sets off to march to Hastings and meet Harold and his troops on their way from the north of England. The adversaries confront each other. The battle rages for a whole day. Harold is killed by an arrow in the eye, and the Norman victory will change England's destiny forever. William the Bastard becomes William the Conqueror, crowned King of England. But why did Edward name a Norman as heir to the throne of England? At the time when the story starts, Viking pirates had been making repeated incursions into Western Europe for 2 centuries. They had been well established in Normandy since the early 10th century. In 911, the Viking Rollo took the title Duke of Normandy. In 1035, Robert, 6th Duke of Normandy, named William the Bastard, his illegitimate son, as his heir. William's early days were difficult, but he was a tenacious fighter, and from his castle at Falaise, he was able to impose himself as Duke of the land of the Norsemen. In the mid-11th century, England was rich, but weak. The Vikings had destroyed the Saxon monarchy. The House of Wessex surrendered in 1016, and King Canute of Denmark took the crown of England. His son succeeded him, but died prematurely. The Saxon nobles called Edward the Confessor, heir to the House of Wessex, back from exile. Having lived in the Kingdom of France for almost 20 years, he was more French than Saxon. It is not surprising that he named William, his cousin, as his heir. Carefully drawn, with great attention to detail, daily life in the 11th century passes before our eyes. The tapestry is a veritable documentary. It provides information on the standard kit for soldiers in Western Europe. Helmets with nose guards and chainmail or hauberks were worn by most of the combatants, Saxon and Norman. Without this helmet, the Normans are recognizable by their shaved heads and beardless faces. The Saxons, in contrast, have moustaches and long hair. Shortly after the Normans land, there is an incredible scene showing food preparations and feasting. Careful study of the picture takes us right into the Norman encampment. The final confrontation clearly shows the composition of the armies. Horsemen and archers are a feature of the army of the Norman invader. The Saxon army is composed of foot soldiers who fight with swords or with great blows of their long-handled battle axes, held in both hands, a legacy from the Danes of the early 11th century. Marking the journeys between England and Normandy, the ships appear 4 times. A long, slender hull, the mast supporting a large rectangular sail, a figurehead designed to frighten the enemy, transporting men and horses equally well. Their Viking heritage is clear. These very fine ships, capable of withstanding rough seas, were fitted with a flat base so they could come ashore on a beach without a harbour. This is how William landed at Pevensey, on a long beach at the edge of an area of marsh and heath. Although most buildings are shown symbolically, some details can tell us about the architecture of the time. For example, the similarity between the Hall of the Exchequer in the castle at Caen and this Norman palace. Bosham Church, where Harold prays before leaving for Normandy, has retained this great triumphal arch between the nave and the choir. And even though only the Romanesque abbey existed at the time, this building on a rocky outcrop is clearly St. Michael's Mount. Blue, yellow, red, green, stem stitch, couching stitch, 10 thread colours and 4 embroidery stitches were enough for the medieval artists to create this superb hanging. No perspective effect, no third dimension, but the use of colour and the depiction of movement give the work a quite remarkable vigour of expression. Horses' legs in different colours, rumps in different colours. The effect achieves the depth needed for the picture. elongated outlines, hair flying in the wind. There's no doubt about the speed of these horsemen. These horses go from walk to trot to gallop, suggesting the cavalry charge. A hail of arrows, spears, and javelins. Every detail, every gesture contributes to the realism of the battle. Even though the tapestry includes numerous Latin texts, giving an official and authorized look to the story it is telling, one must imagine that it was intended for a largely illiterate audience. The story in the tapestry is carried by the pictures in this narrative art, similar to stained glass. The upper and lower bands of the tapestry, peopled with fantasy figures evocative of the bestiary of Romanesque capitals, might seem purely decorative. They were probably also helping to tell the story and intended to provide an additional interpretation. There are easily recognizable scenes from Aesop's fables, well known at the time. Isn't this picture of the fox and the crow at the point where Harold is leaving for Normandy an ironic comment? But the designers' real art lay in their ability to create concise scenes using images. During the expedition to Brittany, Conan, pressed by William's army, abandons Dol Castle under siege. The tapestry transposes reality and shows Conan descending the walls on a rope. The Duke of Brittany is made to look ridiculous by a simple picture. The tapestry also teaches us to change our reading habits. Here, Edward is being buried. In the next scene, he dies. We have to change our perspective and see the death as the main scene in the story. The burial and the coronation of Harold took place on the same day, the day after the death. Simultaneity is therefore suggested by this technique of framing the key scene. King of Norway, attacked England at Stamford Bridge. Harold fought him there and then learned of William's arrival. The Saxon troops, weakened by fighting, travelled over 400 miles to confront the Normans. The account leaves out this event and gives us only a partial view from the Norman standpoint. The tapestry is a highly subjective account from which a moral may be drawn. The focus of the story is not the conquest of England, but the oath sworn by Harold on the reliquaries. And the violent end shows that divine punishment, in the form of the Saxon defeat and the death of Harold, has ended a quasi-sacrilegious reign. The aim of the work is therefore to make the faithful reflect on the sanctity of agreements and the danger which lies in breaking them. Another reading may also be imagined. It is interesting that Harold is not shown in an unfavourable light. On the ship, he is a man of authority who gives commands and holds the rudder. When he is captured, he does not leave the ship, but stands his ground and negotiates with Guy de Ponthieu. A brave soldier, he saves a Norman from the quicksands of the Quenum. Harold can therefore be seen as a statesman who purges himself to protect his country from Norman domination if William takes the throne. The tapestry then becomes a work of propaganda and political justification. Without offending Anglo-Saxon sensibilities, William the Conqueror's strength and intelligence are praised. It was probably a way of preparing the Anglo-Saxons for the loss of their independence and the inevitable changes to society. Within a few years, the Saxon aristocracy had been replaced by a French elite. The Domesday Book, a complete inventory of land ownership, probably for tax purposes, is one example of Norman administrative efficiency. The outcome of the Battle of Hastings left its mark on English history, and the Normandy landings in 1944 produced an interesting inscription in the form of a touching riposte in the military cemetery at Bayeux. We, who were conquered by William, have liberated the homeland of the conqueror.